Two, one, and we're live. Ladies and gentlemen, Caila Littman is in the house. So welcome to my program.
Hi, Wayne. Thank you so much for having me. It is midnight here in New York, so it's the witching hour. So you ready to make some podcast magic?
I hope so, but I think you will definitely bring a lot of joy for our audience, especially the PodFest Asia community, because it's quite rare that we get someone from your organization, which is a really cool organization with such a huge portfolio, right? Of brand,
Yeah.
fantastic, names that we always, I grew up loving. So like Pitchfork is just one out of so many. Vogue, Wired. So I
hmm
just go on and on, right? But tell us exactly, what's a day in the life for someone like you who is working in this fantastic organization.
Sure, that's a great question. So again, I'm Caila Littman. I help run and lead our strategic efforts here at Condé Nast, and that has to do anything with audio. So we have a really wonderful portfolio, as you mentioned. We have our thought leader publications like Vanity Fair and The New Yorker and Wired. We also have Vogue, which has over 27 publications globally, and Pitchfork, which is amazing. It sounds like you're someone who's really into music. So it's just a wonderful place to work. And I think what I found coming to Condé, which I've been here for about a year, is that it's a great place because of the diversity of content. So there's something for everyone across this portfolio, whether it be tech or entrepreneurship or even fiction and poetry that you'll find in the New Yorker. And then when you look to our other publications like Teen Vogue or Allure or Glamour, who are doing a lot of really amazing things when it comes to the audio space, they're reaching a younger emerging audience. And they're also really reaching a female demographic in a way that is very impactful, especially for, as I know a lot of our listeners know, audio and podcasts has traditionally been a demographic that reaches mostly a male audience. So it's really exciting for me to work within a portfolio of brands where I can, reach across the gamut when it comes to age, gender, identity, conversations. There's just so much richness within these editorial properties and IP that is just ripe for the picking.
This is brilliant. And of course, you guys have unveiled so many big plans for audio this year alone, right? And you've been working on, and I think you're also excited as the rest of us in PodFest Asia community about your network. You have so many new podcasts programming, from Wired, Vogue, and Pitchfork. I think the one that really caught my attention is the one with Pitchfork, because we are so used to seeing them in print format, and now it's finally here, the podcast format. Tell us, how the team put together this Pitchfork podcast.
Sure, absolutely. So as you said, this year has been a really big moment for audio at Condé Nast. It was the moment where we took a lot of the shows that we had been doing across the house and decided to create a network. And so what I do is really think about our advertising opportunities, and also the ways that we can be better partners to a lot of our brands out there that want to tap in and reach our audience in a meaningful way. And so I can't take full credit for any of the programming development, but I have had the blessing of being in on the ground floor here as one of the first hires. So when we really made the big announcement in June 2020 that we were forming this podcast network, that we had I think we announced at the time 5 new podcasts coming out in 2020, which we've just launched our 5th of that promised 5. So Pitchfork Review was one of them, which is hosted by Pooja Patel. If you're not familiar with Pooja, she's the editor-in-chief of Pitchfork, and she's just one of those rare and wonderful editorial talents that has a way of reaching across audiences and bringing them together because she has such a palpable personality. So it was really obvious for us when we were thinking about who would helm a Pitchfork podcast, as having someone like Pooja be the person who to steer those conversations. And so I think what is really cool about what she does on the show, if you've listened to any of the episodes, which it's a weekly, it comes out every Friday, which is always a great day to discover new music, is that she's not only talking about albums and bringing on a lot of the Pitchfork editorial talent who are just experts on these sometimes niche albums, but also sometimes albums that we all grew up with and loved, but we just didn't know a ton about. So she's tapping into sort of sometimes the esoteric, but also the sort of the hive mind that we have in the streaming audio world where we're constantly consuming new albums, and she's really dissecting it. And I think what's really powerful about what Pitchfork does here is that it's that emergence of music, which, as we know, if we're in the podcast or the spoken word environment, we're like, okay, so what is it? Like, do people want to listen to music or do they want to listen to spoken word content? And so having a program that was sort of making those two things coexist and having it be a commentary on it was exciting for the portfolio as a whole. I think that where we found early success there was that we grew our audience really rapidly. So it was exciting to see that immediately had an impact in the market. Whereas if you had someone who really was excited about music, like if they had to pick between a podcast or listening to an album, they found this happy medium with a show like the Pitchfork Review.
I'm one of those fans who fell in love with that show. I listened to it religiously. I think the programming is fantastic. It's really a mix of discussion, between your staff writers, your editors, and your contributors, and covering so many, biggest story in music for that particular week of releases that, fans like us in Asia are really excited about. So I think we have to mention about the TikTok episode, right? Because I think it's something that you also posted on your LinkedIn. It's a great example of, how you guys are really experimenting and coming out with great content, and in terms of like how the Gen Z, my kids are from the Gen Z generation. So it's so important that, actually relating to this new audience, and the music platform is like not just informing the charts, right? You're informing the way that social justice movements are also being explained among young people. So how music is going viral and artists are relying on this particular vehicle. So like the 15-second thing in TikTok makes, so relevant in this day and age, which is really crazy about. So what are your takes, hot takes in terms of that particular TikTok episode?
So I loved the TikTok episode specifically because I think that it speaks volumes, pun intended, to how audio in particular is so palpable. So we have a platform like TikTok where you have artists who were relative nobodies in some instances, like Lil Nas X, have to say his name correctly. Who had, Old Town Road. And part of that episode, they dissect how that went from being something that folks were sharing a lot on TikTok to being, this big sensation where he was getting Billy Ray Cyrus to come and sample on a remix of the song. And so the way that you can really accelerate on TikTok your presence, your influence, was something that episode examined. But also what I think is interesting is if you're on TikTok, I'm somebody who spends maybe a little bit too much time on TikTok. And I think for the folks listening at home, we're probably a lot of people who pay attention to emerging platforms because they do, again, speak volumes about how not necessarily my generation, but the younger generation is starting to consume and have their next steps and be informed by what they're consuming. And so what I find to be interesting is that if we could sample more of what we're doing in the podcast world and have those moments go viral in a TikTok capacity, whether it be through somebody I saw took the beginning of the daily music for the New York Times and did a little dance to it. And that dance went viral just because it was like this moment where somebody, like, this is a hugely popular podcast and suddenly the theme music has its own life and its own world within the TikTok platform. And so the way that audio goes viral on TikTok does lend itself to the spoken word audio as well. So that's just something, I kind of ideate on when I think about audio as an ecosystem, as opposed to just strictly podcasts. It's, all these different moving pieces that are, being driven by sounds that really resonate with a broad consumer.
Fantastic. I think you absolutely nailed it when it comes to like social media consumption patterns as well. Like I'm always doom scrolling. I'm always like spending too much time on socials, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on TikTok now because my kids introduced that to me and now I'm kind of addicted, right? So why do you recommend like this Self Magazine's new podcast show?
So I think Self is a really interesting brand when you look at a Condé Nast portfolio. So it's one of those brands that has a really dedicated an audience who are just they live and breathe what Self does, and what they've done during the COVID-19 quarantine that we've all been in here in the States is just, and across the world, is that they've really created a lot of content that is so helpful. It's like the idea that it can improve your life. It's goes one step beyond like service journalism, where it's really supportive. It's sort of this place where you can access a community that also feels like, the friend that's there to help you during the hard times. And so what we did when we were sort of thinking through, okay, what would a podcast platform look like for Self, is how do we take that friend who, can help you, who knows just the right thing to say and the way to make you feel better, whether it be through the best advice or just, the life experience, which sometimes your life experience is not this proven medical advice, but it's just this tried and true experience that you had that can make somebody feel a little bit better about what they're going through. And so what they're doing with their new podcast, Checking In, which everyone should check out, it really is wonderfully produced. And all of our shows, I think, have that Condé Nast sheen to them, where these are being developed by folks who are really immersed in the editorial, and they're trying to make something exquisitely beautiful in terms of how it sounds. And also that includes like music beds, and that includes really trying to make something immersive. Even if it is a show that's more interview based, there's this sound component to it that we try to go for with everything that we do. And so it's that premium quality that is really brought to the table with Self. And one of their most recent episodes, I think you're referring to, is all about doom scrolling. It's all about, especially with the election happening here in the States, everybody was constantly on their devices looking for over a week, really, to get those results. And so that episode was in response to what we felt was like this environment we were all living in early November. And so I think the more that you can make your episodes too super timely and super on point, you're going to see a spike in engagement. It's just kind of basic marketing logic, I think, there. And they've really been able to tap into something unique. There's a big white space when it comes to content that is geared towards health and wellness, and that's Self's bread and butter. They're the authorities on it. Our editor-in-chief, Carolyn Kilstra, she is phenomenal in a way that she just knows everybody that you would need to reach out to. And so it's sort of that network of influence that Self brings to the table for health and wellness that maybe some other brands don't necessarily have the type of access to. And so that's another thing about Condé is, as we jump into podcasting, we do have really unique access to certain types of voices that haven't been part of the podcast conversation yet. And that was really very clear when we looked at Vogue. Vogue launched their first ever narrative podcast series in September, right on the heels of the September issue. And it was a very ambitious project, a 12-episode docuseries all about fashion and culture in the 1990s. And what was really exciting about working with the team that was producing that and working in market to, message around what this unique and really just different sort of podcast. Like there wasn't really anything that existed that included the types of talent, the types of access to designers out there before this podcast came out. And, hearing the types of interviews that some of my colleagues were going on with supermodels and, big name designers was honestly I was feeling starstruck over Slack. I was like, oh my gosh, you just got off a interview with who? It just was so casual, So yeah, it's been kind of a whirlwind in that sense here at Condé, being able to have those conversations and bring them out and share them with more people so intimately through audio.
That's a common thread and also a trend that I noticed in a career where you're part of all these amazing premium content in the podcasting world. And of course, we have to mention about this legendary Ben and Jerry's podcast that you were part of during the early days, right? So,
Yeah.
I remember that you guys launched like a 6-episode series. That was during your time Media. So we're backing up a little bit before your time in Condé. And in Vox Media, you're part of this podcast that tackles racism in America. Mm-hmm. So do you feel really privileged to be part of always, all this exciting content in terms of its creation as well, and bringing all these, ideas to life? Tell us more about the experience.
Yeah, absolutely, Wayne. That's so sweet of you to say. I think that it was really a privilege to be able to be part of the early concepting around the Ben and Jerry's podcast that Vox Media produced. Just what was unique about it, too, was that Ben and Jerry's had historically come to Vox Media when I was there for, a few years, where we were really working on what was our branded audio going to look like. And for Vox and, for Condé, and something that I've tried to always do in my career is work for organizations whose editorial content I'm so excited and believe in. And I really feel has like the bone structure of good, well-researched journalism. So being able to be part of both of these organizations has just been a dream. It's crazy to me that, 10 years ago, I was working in like education in a completely different career. And now I'm, at these really amazing publishers. But I digress. So at Vox, what we were doing with Ben and Jerry's was trying to meet them where they were and also bring to them like something that really was unique to the Vox DNA, was that we wrote about these topics and these issues at length within our editorial coverage. Vox.com, helmed by Ezra Klein and his editorial team. These were topics that were really important and critical to the DNA of what they were already doing. So it did feel like a very good content marriage. But in the early days, it was sort of like, how many episodes make sense to go over this? Because when you're ideating on like the quantity of branded episodes, the scale that you can drive with a new program, whether it be branded or strictly editorial, those are a lot of questions that you have to navigate within packaging. And I think that 6 episodes has kind of been a sweet spot as I've seen branded podcast packages come together. So that was a really positive learning. And then also thinking about the promotional engine. Did it make sense for Ben and Jerry's to work with us on this? Did we have the contextual environment with the other podcasts that we were already producing on our network at the time to really drive engagement? And the answer was fundamentally yes, because we had the Ezra Klein show, we had The Weeds, we had these really amazing properties that were politically oriented. And it kind of was serendipitous. I departed from Vox in January of 2020 and was moving into this role at Condé. And I still obviously am in touch. The beautiful thing about the podcast ecosystem too is that everybody knows everybody. It's like a small town. So being able to chat with the production folks on that and seeing how the project was advancing was great, but it was also happening at this backdrop when, if anyone was paying attention to Ben and Jerry's social media, you would have noticed that they were not shying away from the issues. They were posting about, I think they were getting arrested, and the founders of Ben and Jerry's were actually being arrested for protesting as a lot of the Black Lives Matter protests were, spreading across the country here in the States. And so the fact that uniquely they had this project that had been in the works for a while already launching, it just was a very perfect timing. Like, that doesn't always happen. It doesn't always happen that you start planning a marketing campaign in September of 2019 and in September of 2020 you've picked up the momentum on these other cultural moments that you could never have predicted. So
it's very prophetic, isn't it? And sometimes you just can't control what's going to transpire, especially when it comes to predicting the right time to drop a new podcast show around this topic. It just reminds me, of the time when during the height of Black Lives Matter movement, right? Mm-hmm. Run the Jewels dropped a single that has the running lyric, I can't breathe. And that was a song that they penned like way before this, happened. The George Floyd incident happened, and of course, your Ben and Jerry's podcast appeared at the right moment at the right time, and got people talking about this 6 episode series even up until today.
Yeah, and it was a really exciting moment for Vox, and it's always exciting to see places that I always think of, your career path sort of as a collection of sometimes alma maters. Like I learned from this institution. I carry the knowledge that I gained there into what I do elsewhere, and so it is really fun to be able to cheer your colleagues on from the sidelines when they're doing these amazing things. And you also learn a lot. Like we, as an industry, really need to observe the types of branded moments that are happening and collect all the data. Like, even though we don't know everything from outside looking in, we can see what kind of impact or halo effect they have. And I really do think that the Ben and Jerry's podcast was a moment for the industry to also say, oh, we can do branded content that is not that has a historical impact, that has a connective tissue that goes beyond just it's not just talking about ice cream. I don't think ice cream is really mentioned in it at all. So it is kind of amazing that you can take something and whip it into something completely different and have this really high level, like upper funnel conversation about what the brand stands for. And like that's kind of the vehicle that audio has for a lot of brands that are looking to do something branded, is that they can be a vehicle to really challenge audiences, but also embed with them like this concept on a deep level of what that brand stands for. And so I just think it's a huge success that they're kind of known for having taken on such an ambitious project with a premium publisher like Vox.
That's fantastic. And I absolutely love this conversation so far. It's touching on all the topics that I really love. So we have to maybe get your advice and your hot take on the next topic that we're going to discuss about. It is about the room for improvement, right? In terms of how advertisers have different needs, different goals and objectives. And of course, there's always like a room for improvement in terms of bringing like audio activation or campaigns and actually deliver it in the form of a podcast, for example. Like, where are the areas that you think are solely, closing in terms of the gap, and actually you're seeing the most, marked improvements in areas? Which are the areas?
So, I mean, it's a great question. And I think that my point of view is informed by the places where I've worked. And I think for Condé, and for Vox and for other publishers, you have to also think about like what differentiates you. What is the thing that you can bring to the table that folks in your competitive set or even in the audio ecosystem as a whole just don't have? And how do you augment that? How do you take that and nurture that within your organization and then speak to it really clearly in market so folks recognize you for bringing that to the table as like a unique differentiator in terms of your product? And so the way that I think that the podcast ecosystem, but audio as a whole, is moving towards is a diversity in the types of messaging. I think for up until today and beyond today, the host read is going to be the workhorse of the ad industry for podcasts. But I also think that you can have personality-driven advertising within audio that doesn't necessarily rely solely on the host, but could leverage the personality of a brand's identity. And when you look at like NPR, you look at the New York Times, they're not using their hosts because there is that editorial divide. You can't have your journalist who's reporting on a big tech company also talking about that big tech company and endorsing it within an ad read 30 seconds later. And so I think that the big gap or the room for improvement that I'm super excited about are coming up with those storytelling vehicles within the advertising spaces within a show that are more driven by the brand's identity and the brand's personality and less contingent on the individual host personality. Because I think they both do the same thing ultimately. They still have the credibility and the influence, but they're kind of the delivery system is a little bit different. And so that's something that we're working on at Condé, and like we've had a lot of success with in terms of thinking about how we can be contextually relevant and integrated into what an advertiser wants to accomplish, but also have it be very married to what our brands are trying to achieve. And one brand that I really love working with in-house, like they're all amazing editorial folks here. It's just every day I get to go into the meeting with some of the most brilliant people. And I just am really floored by Vanity Fair all the time, how in the weeds they are on all things entertainment. And they're constantly thinking of ways that they can do what they do in audio. They have about 3 podcasts and more on the way, and do them in a way that really is relevant to the types of clients that are the bread and butter of their advertising business, specifically like for your consideration campaigns when it comes to the Oscars or it comes to the Grammys or whatever the award show is. Vanity Fair will know what's happening long before anyone else does. And to be around that influence and the sheen of the Vanity Fair brand has been a really fun way to productize here internally at Condé, and then bring those things to our big streaming partners that like to partner with us on those ad campaigns.
Guess what? It's already 27 minutes. Time is just passing us by so quickly when we are having such an absorbing, conversation. I can't let you go until I ask you the next question. We know that you're very passionate about storytelling, whether you're exchanging, anecdotes with strangers at a bar, or you're dreaming up how a company can better share its brand story. You build your life around listening, writing, and rewriting stories, right? So we definitely want to ask you, what are some of your few favorite movies? What are you currently reading? What are your favorite podcasts? So you have 3 more minutes to answer this question.
Okay, in like 20 seconds or less. Right now, I'm reading this nonfiction book called I think it's called Say Nothing by Patrick Radden Keefe. It's on my nightstand right behind me. It's all about the Troubles in Ireland and like the late 20th century. And it's such a page turner, very good. In terms of podcasts that I love this one podcast that's led by Josh Gondelman, who's a comedian here in New York. It's called Make My Day, and it's a game show format. And all my friends are always like, you keep talking about this show. And I'm like, I'm obsessed with it. In terms of movies, I just watched that movie with Ian McKellen and Helen Mirren called The Good Liar. Very good. Highly recommend. And yeah, I don't think I have many other recommendations that I can throw at you. Those are the ones that I have on the top of my head. But thank you so much, Wayne. This was awesome.
Yeah, and 2 more minutes to go. So squeeze in one last question, right? It's from one of the attendees who are tuning in, Andrew Roper, who happened to be one of the winery, I think, entertainment business in Australia, down in Melbourne. I actually met him before, and he's actually here attending this particular PodFest Asia event. So he's going to ask you this question. In this time of no travel, how is Condé Nast going about educating and preparing for the new normal?
I mean, it's a huge undertaking that we don't take lightly here. And I can't speak for the whole organization, but I can speak to how some of our brands that I work with so closely in audio are doing it. And Condé Nast Traveler is a great example of it. Their forthcoming issue for March is all about how we're going to re-enter the world of travel and how we're going to think about traveling safely. And so these topics are just constantly top of mind. We've also pivoted to doing a lot of virtual events, which clearly, Wayne, you know how to execute on those. So I think that the education in terms of just the content is one thing, but then the education in terms of our partners is another thing, because it's hard to say that something's been successful if this is, like your first go around doing a bunch of virtual events during a pandemic. So I think that there's a lot of trust, and we're fortunate at Condé where we have the trust of a lot of the partners that we have, where they say, okay, well, we'll try this with you and we'll see how it works if you're going to do a virtual event, or if you're going to take the reins on like a new e-com product. Like there's a lot that we've been able to test out and also build case studies around during this time. But it is, you're right, Andrew, it's education. It's like a constant preparation, and you have to be really iterative and you have to think about people's comfort levels and be, really lead with empathy.
Fantastic. A great way to sign off and close off this program. And this has been fun and effortless doing this together with you. So how I wish we have like another extra an hour to just continue to riff on more topics. But maybe for our next edition of this particular PodFest Asia virtual event, we are going to do a second round in January or early Feb. So we're definitely going to re-invite you back again and tell us what's in store in terms of the podcasting content from Condé Nast in the year 2021. All right.
I can't wait. Thank you, Wayne. You have a good rest of your festival, and thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. Keep yourself safe. Take care of each other over
You
there.
too. Bye.
Bye-bye.